Hello everyone, my name is Hisham and today I'm going to talk to you about components in React. Now, a component in React is simply a UI element, so anything that you see rendered on the screen in a React application can be considered a component, and you can choose to make components as big or as small as you want. Now, I think the React website is a good way to demonstrate some examples of components. Now, for example, this search bar at the top, this is basically a React component that you can define once and reuse anywhere. So whenever I want to have a search bar, I can just call it whenever I want and only write the code for this once. Same thing goes for these buttons. So this is like one single component that I can call and just change the text and maybe the color. And for example, this is like a component that displays the code. So all I have to do is pass different code snippets and it will display different code. And yeah, so for example, like these elements on the left and these elements on the right. So these are mostly like reusable components. And actually, if you right click and hit inspect and then go to components, you can actually inspect all the different components. So yeah, if you hover over, you can actually see how the components are architected, and you can even see the state inside of those components. Now, our most basic component, we have the app component. So this is the default component created by our Vite boilerplate. As you can see, it returns some JSX, which is then automatically transformed into HTML. And we call this element in our main.jsx component. Well, this is not a component, this is just the entry point for our app. As you can see, it gets the element by the ID of root, and then it renders the app component inside of it. And as you can see, we wrap it inside this React.strict mode. Now, this is just for development purposes. It helps you catch bugs and pretty much unintended behavior in development, but it doesn't do anything in production. So this is just for development purposes. I will make a separate video about React strict mode because it does have some weird behavior that you probably won't understand at first. Now, as you can see, we have the app component here, but the app component is actually in a completely different file. So how do we take the app component from here and we can render it over here? Well, for that, we use the export syntax. So as you can see, we define a simple function, and then we export it as default with the name of app. And what this does, it basically exports the function with its default name, which is app, and then we can import it in this file. Now, in general, I don't recommend using default exports in React. A better approach would be named exports. Now, the biggest reason is named exports are easier to refactor and they have better IDE support and less bugs in general. And I guess I will talk about default exports in maybe in a different video and why named exports are generally preferable. But for now, we're going to keep it this way, just for learning purposes. And as you can see, this is like the simple syntax for importing and exporting. Okay, so now let's talk about our basic component. Now, as you can see, we have a use state here. I'm not going to talk about this right now because this is a different concept in a future video. And we render this JSX. Okay, and what we have is actually this application right here by default. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to delete all of this stuff. And we're just going to render a simple div. So I'm going to delete all of this. I'm going to type div. And I'm going to say hello world. I'm going to delete all of this stuff. We don't need it anymore. And even the CSS file. I'm going to hit Control S. And when I go back to our application, as you can see, we have hello world, but it's not like displayed correctly. So I'm going to go back, and I'm also going to go to the main.jsx file and actually delete this CSS file as well. Now it should look as intended. Yeah, just a white page and simple text. Let's also delete these files. We don't actually need them right now. And yeah, so this is like the most basic React application. Now, as a requirement for React components, every component must be defined as a JavaScript function, but it must start with a capital letter, so it must use Pascal case in the meaning that every word in the function name must begin with a capital letter. So this is a requirement that you have to follow. And if the function returns JSX, then it's automatically a React component. Now you may have noticed that I don't need to import React. Now actually in older versions of React, you actually have to import React. So you have to type import React from React. So this is required in older versions, but as you can see, ESLint actually throws a warning saying that it's defined but never used. So we don't actually need to do this. We can just delete it, and React will automatically detect this stuff and transform it as necessary. If you want to read more about this, then you can check out the new JSX Transform article. So this explains in detail how this works and why you don't need to import React in order to write React components. Now the second thing, like the biggest difference between JSX and regular HTML, is we don't use the class keyword. So if we want to add a class name to an HTML element, we don't actually type class. And as you can see, like the autocomplete automatically tries to suggest class name because I have this file as a .jsx extension, which helps VS Code detect that this is a React component, so it can autocomplete stuff using the React syntax. So in React, you actually have to use class name instead of class. And this is the biggest difference. So you can just type classes as you want. So like you can say container and you can add this class in a CSS file, and it works the exact same way as a regular HTML class attribute. Now, if you actually want to learn more about this and like why it works like this, then you can actually check out this thread in Stack Overflow. It explains in detail like why we have to use class name instead of class in React in general. Now this is the default component, but if we actually want to create other components, you can do that in React, and you can actually create multiple components in a single file since they're all just simple JavaScript functions, so there's nothing too special about coding in React. So for example, let's say I want to make a component that displays the name of my application. So for example, let's use the snippet that I showed you in my previous video. So I'm going to type RFC. This is going to start a basic React function. I'm going to call it app title. And I'm actually going to remove this default import and just remove all the export stuff. So we're only going to use this component inside of this file. So this is the default app title. And for example, I want to call this code with Hisham. And if I want to use this component, so you can see that we have a linting suggestion saying that we created this function, but we're not actually using it. So in order to actually call a component in React, it's a very simple syntax. So all you have to do is come here. I'm going to open it and I'm going to type the name and I'm going to close it. So yeah, this is the most basic way to call a component. So you can call it in similar syntax to make and write in like HTML. You just open and say the name of the function and then just close it. And that's pretty much it. This is like the most basic way to create a component in React. It's not that complicated, just a function that returns JSX. And now if we go to our application, we can see that we have code with Hisham. And the cool thing is, so this is like a reusable function. So if I want to use it in different places in my app, let's say, for example, I want to display the title in my header and my footer. So I can actually like call this multiple times. So if I go call it like 5 times, and if I go back to my application, you can see it displays 5 times. So, and the cool thing is, if I change it, it will actually change in all different places because this is a reusable component and we have one single source of truth. So we don't have, so if we call it 5 times, we only have to change it in one place and the change will be reflected everywhere. So if I go back, it says blog everywhere. Now let me undo this and only call it one time. So yeah, this is the most basic way to create functions in React. And if you want to learn more about this stuff in detail, you can actually go to the official React website and go to your first component page. And they show you in a little bit more detail how to create components with different examples. So to recap, React lets you create components. They're considered as reusable AI elements. And in a React app, so every single UI element that you see is a component. And React components are basic JavaScript functions, except they must always begin with a capital letter, and they must return JSX markup. So this is how you create components in React. I hope this video was helpful, and if it was, feel free to leave a like, subscribe, and a comment. And yeah, see you in my next video.